Hello, YouTube. If I asked you to name the most controversial pianist of all time, I bet most of you would think without hesitating Glenn Gould. Glenn Gould does things with pieces that nobody even dreamed possible. In a lot of cases, he does things that nobody would ever dream of doing because they're so absurd that the idea would never occur to any sane person. That being said, he is undoubtedly one of the greatest geniuses in all of music, certainly in the history of 20th century music. He is above and beyond just about everyone in terms of precision of finger technique, in terms of the brilliance and inventiveness of his interpretations. And today we're going to listen to him performing the very famous Rondo alla Turca by Mozart. And I promise you, you will not be disappointed. He does things that make you just leap out of your chair and say, I've never heard Mozart like that before. One thing you have to keep in mind with Glenn Gould is you have to eliminate from your mind right away the idea of sort of historical accuracy. When you listen to Glenn Gould play Bach, you're not going to hear anything like what Bach probably, to the best of our knowledge, actually envisioned. And when you listen to him play Mozart, there is no chance that Mozart actually envisioned these pieces this way, the way that Gould plays them. They are very unusual. That being said, I don't think that Glenn Gould is just doing what he does for the sake of effect. I don't think he's, and some people would disagree with me on this, but I do not think that Glenn Gould is a pianist who says, let me see how I can be provocative. I think he just takes a look at the music and says, how can I make this music as effective and interesting as possible? To heck with whatever the composer thought or indicated. I am going to present this in the way that I think is the most compelling. And there is, of course, a certain amount of arrogance to that. Undoubtedly, there's a certain element of I know best and, I know better than Mozart. And Gould is, of course, famous for having said, he thinks that Mozart was not a great composer, particularly in his later years. Sometimes one wonders, is he being provocative? Is he being serious? Is he taking this all just sort of as a jest? Hard to say. But without further ado, let's listen to this Rondo alla Turca and talk about some of the things along the way that Gould is doing that are very unusual. Here we go. Gosh, so we could talk about that first phrase quite a lot. Already, of course, the thing that probably strikes you all right away is the tempo. Okay, this is so much slower than we're used to hearing this piece played. Everybody likes to take this almost as a virtuosic piece and show, wow, what can I do? Wow, so impressive, right? I've heard so many performances of this piece like that. And when I heard this tempo by Glenn Gould, the first thing that went through my mind was, that's ridiculous. How can anybody play this piece at that tempo? And then the second thing that went through my mind was, you know what? That actually sounds a lot like a march. And then I started to think about it more and more and just suddenly realized, you know what? That's actually a really, really effective tempo for this piece because you can feel the piece really marching. It doesn't sound like a race. It doesn't sound like a horse race anymore. It sounds really like a march. And later on, you'll hear as well, this tempo gives some of the ornamentation and the percussive effects in this piece more time to shine. So it's really, I think, a very, very compelling choice of tempo, although it's very unusual. The other thing that you probably notice right away in this piece is the way that he changes the articulation. Mozart gives us a slur here at the beginning. But Glenn Gould, being Glenn Gould, changes that to, he plays every single note here staccato. Almost in a sort of a pedantic way. Now, I don't know what's going through his head. Whether that's effective or not, I'll leave you to be the judge of that. It is certainly not what Mozart indicated, but it certainly gives us a new twist on this piece. Let's continue on. He plays it very simply. Now, you'll probably hear Glenn Gould singing in the background here. Let's talk about that in just a second. Yeah, Yeah. I mean, before we get to the singing, the way he emphasizes the bass here is very nice. And I like the way with the trill at the end, and this is something I often tell my students, it's really nice the way that he has an exact number of repetitions in the trill. So rather than just sort of doing some sort of indeterminate number of back and forths, he has dugga 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 dum, something like. You can really hear the mechanical nature of that trill. Sounds very effective. And now let's talk a little bit about the singing. This is something that, you know, anybody who listens to Glenn Gould is going to encounter. You hear him humming in the background with his deep baritone voice. And to my taste, this is you know, you wonder, to what extent is this really necessary? Now, I would love to sing along as I play, and I think a lot of other musicians would, but we don't do it. Why? Because it sounds ridiculous, and it distracts from the music. And you know, any teacher would also tell us, don't sing while you're playing. It's very, very distracting. Now, I have a really, really hard time believing personally that Glenn Gould, who was one of the greatest pianists of all time, played organ at an amazing level as well, had so much coordination, so much finger technique, that he was simply incapable of performing without singing. It seems like a mind like his, a talent like his, would be able to overcome that. And I find it sometimes very distracting. I think there's a certain, also here, a kind of an element of arrogance, like, or perhaps sort of trying to foster that image of the reclusive, bizarre, unusual genius. I would think that if he really put that amazing mind of his to work, he could figure out how to play without singing. You know, you also have this, for example, with Keith Jarrett, very extreme, and he also has that sort of eccentric image. Very, very similar kind of thing. And I would love to really see if Glenn Gould would have been able to eliminate that, because it seems kind of over the top. But anyway, let's continue on. There he's really singing along. It's interesting also with these phrases, he doesn't play them the same each time. Sometimes he plays these notes along, and other times, so there's a kind of in the repetition sometimes a little bit of variation, sometimes long, and then on the repetition short. It's not what Mozart wrote at all. If you compare this to the articulation that he has in the score, this is not what Mozart did, but again, that's Glenn Gould saying, I can supersede Mozart, I know best how this piece should be played. A little ornamentation there. And I think here, in this tempo, these rum bump bump in the left hand are really effective. I mean, if you play it super fast, you can't hear them so well, but here, nice echo effect. It's very nice, actually. And again, it's not a race, it's a march. You can really sort of feel the bump, 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 you know, really marching along. I like the way that he emphasizes the bass. You can hear those bass notes, these ones. He's holding the bass notes longer than they're indicated in the score, which I would do too if I were playing this piece. And now we get this Turkish music, by the way. This is supposed to sort of bring to mind a Turkish band. They were apparently quite popular in Austria around this time of Mozart's. And this is sort of the percussion. We come back to the original theme again. By the way, for those of you who don't know what a rondo means, a rondo is a piece where we have sort of A material, B, A, C, A, D. We're always coming back to the original theme with something new in between each time. That's the basic idea of a rondo. Sort of like a musical club sandwich. Very very heavy and pedantic, but also, it's sort of that march character in this piece. Really, you can just hear the drummers, right? And the slower tempo allows that to come across better. Now we're in the coda section of this piece. Yeah, this I've never heard anybody do in this piece. Instead of, Mozart gives us a little sign that these chords are supposed to be broken. But rather than doing them from top to bottom like most everybody would do, he plays the top notes first, and then the other ones come afterwards. So the melody note still comes on time. This may have some sort of historical basis in Baroque music before Mozart's time, but it's quite, like I said, unusual to hear somebody do that with this piece in the classical era, and it really gives it a kind of a strange rhythm. Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. Never heard anybody do that. Yeah, this is also very strange. Very strange. Every time I think I know what Glenn Gould is going to do, he completely surprises me. And here, Mozart writes these individual notes in the left hand, but as you hear, Glenn Gould does the arpeggios instead, completely changes that. He has to know that this isn't what Mozart wrote. He has to know that, and I don't know why for the life of me that he feels obligated to change those things. Normally, classical musicians really learn the idea of sort of at least attempting to be somewhat faithful to the score. But again, with Glenn Gould, there's a certain element of arrogance to it. He says, hey, I'm going to do what I think is best, regardless of the way the music is written, regardless of what Bach or Mozart did. And it's, you either love it or you hate it. I have to say, it is really fascinating to listen to Glenn Gould because you never know what you're going to get. You often completely rethink your interpretation of a piece. And there are times, it's kind of hit and miss, with a lot of other pianists, you know what you're going to get. Great. With Glenn Gould, sometimes he does something you just think that's absolutely absurd. And then another time he'll do something and you think, my goodness, that is just absolute genius. With this Rondo alla Turca, like I said, he has the gall and the vision to completely change the articulations and the tempo in this piece from what we normally hear. And I would be really curious to hear your thoughts about that. What do you think about it? Do you like Glenn Gould's performance here? Do you hate it? Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.